So very exciting to be talking to you, Dr. Brandy Yee, based at University of Calgary in Alberta, Canada. And Brandy is a former school principal and an expert on school improvement and very knowledgeable about especially adolescence and learning. And today I want to talk to Brandy about flexible high school completion in Canada. So Brandy, can you share with us how this program came about and what the main ideas are behind flexible high school completion?
Absolutely. So thank you for having me. It's again a delight to be able to participate in this online forum with you. So when you think about high school flexibility in our context, I think that it's important to kind of give the viewers a bit of a history in terms of why we arrived at this notion of having to shift our model of high school education for our students. And so it seems like a long time ago now, but in 2010, there started to be a dialogue with Albertans in our province. And we'd never approached it this way before. Education, we'd always kind of held pretty close to our hearts, and it was policymakers and people in education strictly that were making the decisions about what happened in our schools. The government at that time put a call out to Albertans, and basically it was entitled Inspiring Education. And so they asked Albertans, community members, members of industry, business owners, everyone, what would it mean to be an educated Albertan in the year 2030? So that was 20 years ago. Right now, it doesn't seem like we're so far away from that. But at that point, to think about, 20 years, it was a big thing. So what would it mean to be an educated Albertan in the year 2030? And then we took that information and we looked at what it would mean to be educated and what it was that was happening in our schools, and if the two were aligning. And I think based on the information that we got from our community members, is that there was a disconnect between what our community, what society said that we needed from our students and how we were teaching them in schools. Mm-hmm. So we looked at that, and basically what was created, so we looked at inspiring education, and so that was really the dream. So what would our dream be for our students in the year 2030? Then we moved to inspiring action. So how do we make that dream a reality? What we found is that the schools at that time in 2010, which was, over a decade ago, it was still in many cases a very industrialized model of education, right? Mm-hmm. So we were preparing students for a society that no longer existed, to go into factories and to do very, kind of routine robotic kinds of tasks. And we knew that what was happening in society now would demand something very different, right? We needed to develop competencies in students rather than just be able to regurgitate facts, and needed our students to be able to be lifelong thinkers. And so we knew at that point it required a fundamental shift in what we did in classrooms with our students. And so what happened at that time is that our education minister at the time, his name was Minister Dave Hancock, he was redefining what essentially our marching orders were. So it's called, our Education Act, our School Act, and what it is that we do in schools. So before, it said, students should understand basic math facts, the capitals of Canada, those kinds of very fact-based. And instead, he moved to something that really caused a cognitive dissonance with educators in Alberta. And I think for me as an educator, it was one of the defining moments of before and after. And so he looked at, in our students, wanting to create, they talked about the 3 E's. So engaged thinkers, ethical citizens with an entrepreneurial spirit. So that was fundamentally very different than what we had been doing in the past. What we also realized at that time is that that shift in thinking would require a shift in the structures that were in place, because the current structures that were in place did not allow for that shift in thinking to occur in many ways. Because if we were still bound by old structures, we wouldn't get to where we needed to be. And so one of the things that was very typical in high school is that we had a credit system. So, and credits were based on hours. So one credit in high school was 25 hours. Most courses were either 3 credits or 5 credits. And the way funding happens in high school, it's attached to how many credits a student earns. And so those structures had been in place for a long time. And when schools and principals are looking at funding attached to those structures, they were very hesitant and reluctant to move beyond that. And so one of the things that the Minister of Education allowed at that time was for us to break free of those structures. And I think it was the relaxing and the easing of those structures that allowed for some of that more advanced thinking to happen. And so the system at that time became far more learner-centered, right? And then for teachers, it was really the role of the teacher changing from that knowledge authority to an architect of learning, right? To creating learning with students. It also required a shift in thinking on part of the students, because I think that the system they were in at that time didn't allow them a lot of agency in their learning, to be active participants in their learning. And so over the course of that kind of decade, starting in 2010 to right now, we've seen a gradual shift in the structures in the high school, and then what it allows students to experience during their schooling in that grade 10 to grade 12 year.
So how does the flexibility work? I mean, it means that courses can be repeated and students can take different pathways and different amounts of time to achieve a certain level of competence. Is that how it works?
Yeah. So I think that the flexibility has has taken on many different forms. So some examples. Before, we used to bundle courses and they used to be pretty canned. So the Alberta government would say, okay, let's say a calculus course was 5 credits, so 125 hours. And it was only offered one time a year in semester 2 in a particular time slot. And so what that meant for students is that if, let's say, you had a particular student who was really interested in some robotics courses or those kinds of things, if it didn't fit into that schedule in that particular school, then the student wouldn't be able to pursue some of those other pieces. And so flexibility in the Calgary environment, what it has allowed us to do is that we've opened up our timetables across high schools. And so before, one student used to be registered and attached to one school, and you could only take courses from that particular school. The flexibility model here has allowed those borders to be open. So a student might take an English course at one high school, they might take a physics course at another high school, they might take a robotics course at another school, or if they were really interested in a culinary arts program, perhaps their school didn't have commercial kitchens, but another school did. And so what it allowed our students to do was, rather than to allow the physical structure of the school and the physical structure of their timetable to dictate what courses they were allowed to pursue, it was one way of opening it up so students would be able to pursue that were of interest to them.
It's almost like a campus model. What about students who failed a math class or didn't do well in a certain class and knew that they would need this competence level later on? Can they do it again? And under which circumstances can they do it again?
Yeah. So one of the things that had kind of dictated students taking courses and repeating those courses was timetabling. Another piece was related to our provincial exams. So in high school, we have exams that are dictated by the province, and there was particular schedules when those exams were offered. So you could only take an exam at a certain point, and if you weren't completed the course, you could never take the exam again. Or if you needed to repeat the course. The province during this whole model of, and it's been an iterative process, does this work? Does it not work? What do we need to shift? And I think that that's one of the things I've been very thankful for, is that the province has been very open to high schools trying to figure out what works, what doesn't. And what works, in a high school, in an urban environment may be very different than a high school in a rural environment. And so you'll see some subtleties and some differences. And there's been some really fantastic things that have happened, in our high schools that are in rural centers related to agriculture and farming and those kinds of pieces as well. But back to your question of repeating courses, they've allowed the exam schedule to be opened up, and a lot of the exams can be taken online now. So if a student, was going to have to go and take another 5-credit course, or a course that was attached to, something that would be important for university entrance requirements, they would be able to do that because they would be able to access the exam at multiple points during the year.
Okay. And did I understand correctly that the exam can be taken multiple times? So if you're not happy with the results, you can take the exam again after taking the course again, or after?
That's correct. Yes, that is correct.
And there's some kind of incentive system. So you have to pay a fee, but the fee is refunded to you if you actually improve your grade.
Yeah,
that is
absolutely.
Very revolutionary by German standards. So perhaps you can explain the philosophy of that a little bit.
Well, and it's interesting. So I think that the piece is that we don't want to, the idea is that we want all students to experience success, right? We want students to we don't want, a high school course and an exam that is really a snapshot of a certain point in time to influence, perhaps in university entrance or, program entrance or those kinds of things. And so the exam should not be the piece that is the limiting factor. And so we want students to do well. And, I guess the advantage to that is that students, especially students we have, that have some anxiety associated with exams, that they know that they have multiple opportunities to be successful. At the end of the day, I think the idea that, one exam is indicative of a student's level of skill in an area is perhaps flawed in my estimation. Students change over time. And so, a student at the beginning of grade 12, if they've acquired other skills and understanding and confidence, if they have that exam and they take the exam again and show a different level of competency, then they should be honored and rewarded for that.
Yeah, that's a very different mindset from our current one, but it's very much, I think, the thinking behind it is enable success and just open the pathways for success to become a possibility for everybody who works hard, because you have to work hard to pass those exams, but you can do it again if you failed the first time or you weren't happy with your results. So what would you say, how do these options of flexible high school completion prepare students for the 21st century world and for further careers and pathways in education and beyond education?
It's always interesting when we speak about 21st. Do you remember when we were just coming into the 21st century and we talked about 21st century? And it
I know.
Like it was so foreign, and now we're 21 years into it, right?
I know, it's crazy. We still see it as the future somehow.
I know. So I think one of the things that this, the flexibility project, so there's a couple of things, I'll speak about some of the partnerships that have kind of come up as we've tried to find our way forward through this flexibility model. So every year in our high schools, we have partnerships with the universities around the province. And so the universities are offering courses to our high school students during some of the break time, spring break, summer, those kinds of things. So our students have the ability within a high school setting to take introductory university courses. So whether it's, English courses, psychology courses, mathematics, those kinds of things, to be able to get a sense of that university environment. So they're taught by university instructors, professors, and it's a very low risk for the students. So they don't pay for the courses. But when they pass the courses, should they pass, then they receive university credit for it. And so, I think that a couple of things, it works really well for our students because I think it gives them the confidence that for some of them who thought that perhaps university wasn't a possibility, it gives them the confidence that yes, they have the capacity to do well in university. I think for our universities, and our universities right now are struggling in many ways. Enrollment has decreased, funding has decreased, tuition has gone up, and perhaps it's a worldwide kind of problem. But I think it also serves our universities well in terms of building a bit of a loyal following, in students. So I think that the fact that in high school, our students are able to have that university experience and to gain confidence in their abilities as a university, a post-secondary learner, I think has been a really positive thing. Students who are in our AP courses, so our advanced placement courses, and I don't know if it's the same for Nick, but should they pass the AP course, they are given university credit, for those courses. And so again, while in high school, we are preparing our students, for that transition into post-secondary and hopefully that successful credentialing in a post-secondary environment. I think the flexibility model, we talked about the shift in kind of the shift in structures that were in place, but there's a real shift in thinking in terms of, the responsibilities of the teacher and the learner within that high school environment. And so, looking at a more student-centered environment, looking at moving from compliance of the students. So you're going to sit in class, you're going to be quiet, you're going to learn, you're going to regurgitate, you're going to take an exam, to really looking at a student, looking at their pathway through a school. So when our students come to us in grade 10, they work with our high school counselors to look at their pathway through high school, right? And so we have different levels of courses in high school. So we have, a 10-1, 2, 4, right? Different levels. At one point, a student -1 is our highest level. At one point, a student would come in and you could only take -1 courses, right? You weren't able, and if you were unsuccessful at a -1 course, then you couldn't move down, or you just failed, or there was no possibility of taking the exam again. Now, when they look at pathways, we have a student who might choose to take a -2 course. They might experience success in that and say, okay, well, now I want to take a -1.
Yeah.
And so it allows the student to experience success, build on that confidence, and then say, what, I believe that I want to take this course because it will, assist me towards credentialing.
You have now described several ways how your system has become flexible. So flexible in terms of time, flexible in terms of space. Where do you take courses? When do you take courses? Courses being repeated, courses being taken at the university level. So maybe my final question is, why is Canada ready to make learning so flexible, so individualistic, and why is your system able to provide so many pathways through high school that there seems to be the right pathway for each individual learner in your system?
Yeah, that's a really great question. I think that it came to the point, and again, I'm speaking from an Alberta context, but you would find similar, flexibility kind of pathways across the country. I think it came to us, it was almost when Germany had their PISA results, early on, what year it was, and it was an indication that you thought the system was doing well, and then it wasn't. And then it was a full stop that you needed to rethink things. And I think for us, we look at, it was going back to the beginning, it was probably 2008 or 9, we looked at what does it mean, or what did you do in school today? You and I have spoken about that before. So what did you do in school today was a cross Canada, longitudinal study looking at student engagement in their learning, really. Yes. So we were doing quite well with PISA results. And I think sometimes the danger when you're doing well in, some of those international standardized tests, you say, okay, well, we don't need to do anything differently. With this, what did you do in school today study showed us is that our students were doing well in standardized tests of achievement, but their engagement in their learning was not good, right? So what that showed us is that we were not producing, teaching lifelong learners. We were just teaching students who knew how to be quiet and compliant in the classroom to get through to the end. But that was serving an industrialized model of education, and that is not the kind of learners that we needed to thrive in today's society. And so we knew at that point that we needed to do something fundamentally different, because our education system, and this is perhaps an exaggeration, but I'm okay to say it, I think we were fundamentally broken in some ways, right? There was a big disconnect between what we were doing in the classroom, what we believed about how students learn, and what we were doing to kind of fill that gap. And so we looked at student engagement rather than just the success of an education system, looking at sheer numbers and achievement. We looked at achievement and engagement together. And that for us is the marker of success. And so if you look at our high school students that we are, and producing sounds very mechanized, but the high school students that are coming out of our education system today, they are, in general, they are achieving well because they are transitioning into post-secondary. They are credentialing. So not just the first transition to post-secondary, but they are credentialing the 4-year, but they are engaged learners. They are seeking learning and seeking to be lifelong learners. And I think for me, that is really the mark of the health of an education system.
That's great. That's a good final sentence. Thank you so much, Brandy Yee, Dr. Brandy Yee in Calgary, for your expertise and sharing this model with us, which may be the future for us someday, but that's something we have to discuss. So thank you very much.
It was a great pleasure. Thank you, Anna.